Hey everybody, it's Justin's here.
Hey everyone, it's Eric.
This is Sonic Boom Live. In case you haven't tuned in before or know what we're doing, Sonic Boom Live is a weekly, I guess, news podcast like thing where we talk about the latest game industry news from a game industry perspective. Every week we cover the largest gaming news headlines. For your consumption, but we kind of give it a spin. So we won't cover usually any sort of rumor mill stuff. If there are, as you'll find this week, anything that's alleged, we make sure it's known as alleged and not for certain. But otherwise, it's pretty much well documented game industry news, and we just give our commentary on it. So this week we'll cover three topics. Eric, do you want to summarize what they are?
Sure, yeah. We on this channel have done a lot of sort of quasi-reporting or contextualizing, let's say, on Microsoft's purchase of Activision Blizzard, and there is an update there. So we're going to dig into that ongoing saga. The second thing we're going to cover is that we're seeing in sort of the fringes of the industry. It's hard to be unaffected by this, but Meta and Twitter are making cuts to their workforce. So we'll look into how that may or may not affect the game industry. And finally, there has been sort of a very quiet confusion around the state of the Doom Eternal soundtrack and the perceived quality of it, with people being surprised, people who'd purchased it being surprised at the comparatively lower quality of the music that came out of it when compared to the previous Doom in 2016. And at some point, the executive producer at id Software came out and gave a statement to basically about what was going on there, and that was in 2020. And then just yesterday, Mick Gordon, who is the composer on the soundtracks for both of the Doom games, the Doom and Doom Eternal, came out with his own statement, a very, very long write-up of from his perspective. So we're going to talk a little bit about that situation with the controversy around the soundtrack and the conversation around what happened and what that may sort of tell us about the games industry and the current status of how things happen to make games. Does that about summarize it, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it touches upon creativity in a lot of the corporate world, where as contractors, if you're working as an artist, a voice actor, a musician, for instance, contracts are kind of everything. And at least from Mick's account, it highlights some of the more disappointing aspects of the game industry and how those types of roles are treated. It even came up not last week, but I think the week before, with the voice actor who plays Bayonetta alleging that her pay was remarkably low and that they should boycott the game. Regardless of your feelings on boycotts and whatever else, it still highlights a pretty serious issue where games will focus around an actor or the music strongly, and the people who are contributing huge parts to the feel and tone of the game are not being compensated in a way that's even, relatively in line with the profits that they make. So it touches upon that. We'll talk about that in more depth. But I think, I guess before we jump into things, if you're already watching this, this is a YouTube stream that we do every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. If you do like this content, please like and subscribe our channel. It does help us understand what people are interested in, what people like to watch. Comment if you'd like to. If you'd like to check it out again next week, we'll likely have another stream for you on that week's latest headlines. But let's just jump right into the first topic. Do you want to cover this one, Eric, or do you want me to do the covering?
I don't mind covering it. Basically, yeah. So Microsoft is buying Activision Blizzard. We mentioned here on this channel. I'm sure you've heard at this point. They made the purchase decision for something like $68 billion.
68.7 to be exact.
Yeah, that's a good sum. And frequently when acquisitions at that scale occur, their regulatory bodies have to come in and just verify that this isn't going to cause issues for competition or antitrust or sort of monopolistic practices. So and that's happening here in this case. It's already been through the regulators in Brazil and Saudi Arabia who gave Microsoft the thumbs up for this acquisition / merger. However, they've hit a few bumps in the road, let's say, at both the UK and the EU regulatory bodies watching this. And most recently, we reported, I think 2 weeks ago now, or was it last week?
I think it was 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
There's 2 episodes ago or whatever. Yeah, we discussed how the CMA, I think the UK's CMA, the Consumer and Market Authority at the UK, had issued a statement, a preliminary response to this that was basically highlighting several concerns about Microsoft and what it would do to competition in the market. And Microsoft responded to them, and with a quasi-open letter, and we covered that. In this case, the EU has basically said, okay, this is going to take us a while. We have seen enough here. We have enough of a concern that we need to go and dig deeper. So what they came out and said was that by March 23, 2023, 32323, they will have a response by that point. And in that, the intervening now 5 months, 4 or 5 months, yeah, we're looking at them working to identify potential issues and to resolve any issues that come up by working with Microsoft and Activision Blizzard. The UK has also come out with some strong statements about their concerns along the same lines. And I think the UK, we haven't heard an update from the UK on their timeline, which I think is still what it was before, which I don't remember the exact date.
Yeah, because the UK, I think, I think they're requesting feedback as well, but they already had, and they're supposed to be generating a report, but the report takes a couple weeks for them to produce. They just gave a preliminary overview of their core concerns, which basically was hey, don't expect all roses from this report that we're going to issue. So
right.
Yeah, we'll have to see what it means or what comes out of the UK report, but that's a few weeks in the works.
Yeah. So we're, basically the regulatory situation here has sort of, let's say, the eye of scrutiny of the regulatory people are coming down hard on Microsoft in the EU, which we at least expected. They've been historically, for this type of merger, very, very particular and thorough. And I think this is the first, to my recollection, merger of this scale in the games industry, which means that those at the EU and their commission to look into this have to do a lot of boning up on the as it was put by Microsoft's, I think, lawyers, $200 billion. Oh no, was it Bobby Kotick? $200 billion industry that is the games industry. Like they just probably don't have as much knowledge about the space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's interesting about this is that, unlike, say, something like Disney purchasing Fox, that's almost squarely a entertainment play, right? It's like one entertainment company buying another entertainment company and
right.
broadening its IP base, which you could argue gives Disney an unfair advantage, but none of which the regulators thought were a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think what the regulators in this instance are seeing is that it's Microsoft. Microsoft owns Windows, the cloud infrastructure, plus the entertainment, and they see that as a significantly bigger threat to competition than a standard play like Disney, or if Microsoft was only a video game company buying something like Activision. I think the fact that they're a larger company than that and can use the content that they have to gain advantage of on their platforms is what's causing significantly more scrutiny than something like the Disney Fox merger.
Yeah, the I would also suggest that one of the things that the CMA and the EU are looking at here is reduction in user choice in the marketplace.
Right.
That is one of the specific things they've called out, is that this, for many gamers, may result in less game choice for people, which, the idea there is that Microsoft could, being now the new owner of these things, conceivably make it so that they're console exclusive to the Xbox and Windows platforms. That means that anyone on a Mac or Linux or a Nintendo Switch gamer or a PlayStation gamer would suddenly lose access to all these games. There would be a vacuum.
Right.
That is opposed. So this is, Microsoft spending 68 billion and change. 67, yeah.
It was 68.7 billion was the purchase price.
68.7, yeah. So spending that much money to buy out other people and then therefore like closing it off and bringing it in-house and creating that vacuum in the space, versus what they could also potentially do with that money is build up their own companies and add, that's the opposite sort of flip side of the coin here, is like, well, what if they just spent $68 billion on building new IP and new content for gamers, thus increasing choice over what we already have right now.
Right.
And I think that is one of the major concerns. If they're looking at it and saying like, yeah, you're just buying up everything in there, then the capital required to start a new company and something at that scale is non-trivial.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, those are like apples and oranges, though, right? Like,
yeah,
one is a functioning business that an investor, in this case Microsoft, is going, we will buy your functioning business at a higher price than what it currently is performing at. So I think they were giving like a $4 or $5 bonus per stock based off of the purchase price. But that's sort of like what the buyout agreement was, is we think your company is more valuable than it currently is at. But for the most part, they were buying like a whatever it is, like a $55 billion business that they increased the price on. The difference then, like them just investing the money in a game, is that when you build a game, there's no guarantee that it will actually make its money back, especially without established franchises. This is something that Microsoft has historically struggled with pretty considerably. They've bought studios, they've tried to start a new IP, and their most successful goes at this was basically having other studios create games for them and then riding that IP wave. Unlike, say, Sony and Nintendo, which have been quite good at creating new IP and building strong brands, Microsoft not so much. Like
Yeah, to be clear, the two examples that come to mind for me of what you were just describing with the way they've been successful is to have the second-ish party platform games of like the Halo series and Gears of War.
Right. And more specifically, like Halo, you could say was Microsoft, but Halo existed before Microsoft purchased Bungie. Yep. Like they were in development of that. They were showing it off on Mac, I think, well before the Xbox, or before Microsoft purchased Bungie outright and be like, you're going to make this an Xbox game. Same thing with Gears. It was an Epic developed game. And they were basically publishing partners for that game to have it published specifically on the Xbox. They probably paid large sums of money to have Epic release it exclusively there. So yeah, I mean, like Microsoft as a company has not had a track record of developing its own IP.
No.
At all. Like Fable, I think, is probably the best example of that. But again, that was buying Peter Molyneux's studio to make it work, Lionhead Studio. Yeah.
Yep. And, it sort of, we haven't heard much from them recently, which is, what's the term? Sort of par for the course for Microsoft with their first and their in-house teams. The teams they bring in-house tend to almost sort of fizzle into obscurity.
At least they had a long history of that during the Xbox 360 era, like making purchases, and especially during the Xbox One era, making purchases.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like there's like, if you look at Microsoft's history, it was like there was a lot of purchasing at the beginning of the Xbox console period. Like the very first one, they had bought up a bunch of companies and made exclusive like publishing deals to get content on their brand new console. Xbox 360 had carried through into that, and they had people like they were publishing partners with a lot of people to get exclusive content on the Xbox 360, but they weren't really making a lot of purchases during the 360 era. Most of the purchases happened at Xbox One era or at the end of the 360 era when they had done really successful, or had been really successful, and they purchased a bunch of new companies, and those companies like hard fizzled. I mean, and you could even argue like Rare and a couple others that were purchased at the beginning of the 360 era fizzled. And now we're going into this brand new generation where supposedly they have a new development mindset, largely led by the folks over at I'm blanking on the name. The people who develop Minecraft.
Mojang,
thank you.
Yeah.
Mojang,
Yeah.
which is directing how the studios should kind of work with third parties or consume third parties, so that they're more likely to produce a better results. So we don't quite know how this is going to bear fruit because we've only really seen games on the Xbox Series consoles that were like legacy studios, like Playground Games and the like. So they had been developing stuff for the Xbox One prior to that, and this new set of games that are under new kind of studio management, we don't know where that's going to be at yet. So
Yeah.
I don't know how this tangent related back to what you were talking about, but basically Microsoft
It was
investing $68.7 billion in studios is a huge gamble for them. So it's like not apples and oranges for them to just put that money into new
creating
development.
Yeah.
To diversify options, at least.
Right. I mean, they could try, and that would, even if they release one or two games, it's still an increase over a potential decrease. And that's the concern. Microsoft, to respond to that, Microsoft's executives have said publicly that I think one person said that Call of Duty will always be available on the PlayStation. Now, people have pointed out that that's not terribly clear, because you could say that, yeah, you're just saying PlayStation, so it could be any PlayStation. And of course, if you have Call of Duty, any of the games that are available now will continue to be available in the future, but not new games, because Call of Duty is a franchise. There is some vagueness there, and that's something that these regulatory bodies are going to definitely be digging into and saying, oh, no, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, like hold them to higher standards, and when it comes to like what exactly their obligations are as a company, and they're gonna have to put into legal terms.
Right.
Because I mean, as you said, it's easy for them to say it will always be on PlayStation, but that's not necessarily true. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to, like, they don't have to even hold to that. It's just like a statement that they made, and there's no legal work that establishes that as the truth. And I think the regulatory body is saying, like, this needs more scrutiny given like the sort of span of things that Microsoft holds. Because even if now they go, it behooves us to have Call of Duty on PlayStation for now. And I don't see them making that change. I don't see why they would. But at the point in which Game Pass grows enough to where it's making enough money for them, they could go, we really want to squash the competition at this point. We do not want PlayStation having any place in being competitive with us. So what we're going to do is now remove, Call of Duty from the PlayStation altogether. So no one wants to own a PlayStation. There's no reason for anybody to own PlayStation now. And if anything, it behooves Sony to put PlayStation games on Game Pass, and they pay us to do that. Like, that's the sort of reality of the situation that Microsoft will promise will never happen. But when market factors put enough pressure on them, they're a business first and foremost. they're obligated to their stockholders, and those factors combined will mean that they will make decisions that were best for the company, not best for the game industry.
Yeah, and there's precedence for that. Sega back in the '90s, there was the Sega Nintendo rivalry,
Yeah.
and Sega at the end of the '90s said, or early 2000s said, "Nah, we're done. Like we're not making hardware anymore. We're getting out of this race. We're gonna just make games," and they did.
And strangely went directly to the Xbox.
Yeah. Yep.
The first wave of like Sega published games that were not console exclusive were, well, not on the Sega platform, were on Xbox. So like you had the sequel to Jet Set Radio, you had Blink's Time Sweeper, you had Panzer Dragoon Orta, you had I want to say there's a couple more that I can't think of.
There were some at around that time that came out on GameCube, but they were oddballs. Like
None of
Monkey Ball.
those.
No, none of those did.
Yeah.
You're right. I say they're oddball, like Monkey Ball.
Yeah, Monkey Ball. They had.
It was like,
I can't even think of any others. Like I was thinking like the Capcom exclusives, but that's
yeah, the Capcom. Yeah, that was a weird time with Microsoft entering into the space and Sega exiting it and sort of handing off.
Nintendo throwing out cash to secure exclusivity deals against PlayStation.
PlayStation 2, yeah.
Strange.
I mean, yeah, after they lost the Final Fantasies, which was big, big for Sony to get those as exclusive, and that came down to like not necessarily backhand, back alley deals. I think, I don't know, but it seemed to be that disk space was a problem. The first Final Fantasy on a PlayStation was 7, and it was, what was it, 4 discs? 4 CDs,
I want to say.
Something like that. Yeah. Versus, a Nintendo cartridge was going to be much, much, much smaller on the N64. Would that have been the N64 era?
For the N64, yeah. It was that was the era that was
PlayStation
2.
Oh, no, it was a PlayStation 1. Yeah, it was PlayStation 1 versus the N64.
Oh, yeah, versus N64.
Not PS2.
Well, kind of. Either way, the N64 carts, like, I think maximum had 32 megabyte of storage space on them.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Yeah, well, interesting enough, a couple weeks ago, or maybe like a month ago, Xbox was pretty confident that this deal would be done by the end of the year. They were voicing as much. And with UK's, where the EU's challenge to this is still not citing anything the UK has chosen to do, or the US for that matter, because the US has been quiet on this. There's some senators that are pushing, but I think largely due to recent elections that there's kind of been a quelling of pushes on any of the federal groups to do anything. But assuming that the Senate holds Democrat, you're likely to see some of the more progressive Democrats push against this deal for competition purposes as well. We just haven't seen anything shake out of that. But now Activision's Bobby Kotick is saying, hey, by the way, I know we said the end of 2022, but now we're pushing to June 2023 because I think the earliest we'll get a result from this investigation period is March 2023.
There's a slight little wrinkle in that statement, and that is that they claimed that they would be in January. They reported that they expected this merger to be completed by end of the fiscal year 2022, which goes until June 2023.
Oh, well.
That said, there were other investors and other groups in the business world that were watching this. And a few months ago, they did say that they expected it by end of calendar year today, given the way things were going with Brazil and Saudi Arabia. Theoretically, the U.S. with the SEC kind of not really seeming to say much about it.
They haven't said anything about it yet. Like the SEC is kind of
quiet.
Been quiet on a lot of U.S.-based mergers.
Yeah.
For a while. Anyways,
right.
Do you think this is bad news for Microsoft?
I think it's extra challenges, and I think as my opinion on the situation really hasn't changed much from last time, which is that I am happy that the EU and the UK are digging into this. simply because of the outsized effect this might have on the overall industry. Not only for fellow developers who knows how that's going to be handled once Microsoft gets them and they start doing what, Embracer Group did. We talked about this last week, where the Square Enix, what was it, Square Enix Montreal or whatever, Studio Onoma,
Yeah.
was shut down after the merger. Like Microsoft could, I mean, Activision Blizzard King has a lot of studios. And they may look at it after they make the merger and say, "Okay, bye," to a few of them that aren't
10% of the
that don't
force is
align.
gone, and then that's equivalent to whatever 6,000 people or something.
Right.
Right. I would assume Microsoft wouldn't do that unless there was pressure on them to do that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it actually in the next segment when we talk about the massive layoffs in tech. But there's reasons why those things happen. I don't think Microsoft's in quite the same state, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess.
Right. And, given that this merger looks like it probably won't go at least until March 2023, like when the EU gives it the thumbs
EU
up
by itself will, right? Like that's
right.
It's like we do not know what UK and the US will do.
Right. And so there's some time still before that decision needs to happen. In the meantime, it'll be business as usual, presumably.
Yeah.
But yeah, what about you? What are your thoughts on
I mean, the
scenario?
scrutiny is warranted, right? Like, as you said,
Yes.
it could have an outsized effect on the industry. I think the points that Microsoft owns not only two platforms, but owns the technology and owns now the IP, makes them quite difficult to be competitive against, given that they probably own the entirety of an infrastructure for a competing platform. So they'd still be making money off of someone else's competition. Those factors alone should raise the scrutiny. Never mind the amount of purchases Microsoft has initiated in the past 2 years. So yeah, warranted scrutiny. I think this might mean that Microsoft may have to compromise something in order for the deal to go through, and whether or not that sort of compromise is going to keep the deal alive is something to be said. Because he's like, we don't know what the structure of the compromise might be, but it might be Call of Duty has to be in writing a cross-platform game. Like something of that nature may be something that's written into the agreements, but it might also only apply to the UK and not the US, and they may agree to doing something like that. This happens all the time in anti-competitive, lawsuits that happen where, Facebook has to do something or Meta has to do something for the EU, but doesn't have to do it for the US. We may even see that with Apple, with the USB-C charging and asking Apple to drop their proprietary charging cables. They could selectively roll that out to EU and only EU, and keep the lightning cables for, not even just lightning, proprietary lightning cables for the iPhone in the US.
Well, Apple's the only one who uses lightning.
Yes, but they use a proprietary connection type. They could do lightning connection through USB-C if they wanted to. They just don't.
I mean, the protocols that they use, yes, are proprietary, of course, but their connector
is intentionally
proprietary
and specific to them for no other reason than it allows them to sell things. Which, I mean, isn't wrong, right? It's them going, hey, like, we make more money on accessories than we need to make on the hardware alone. So we're going to sell more accessories, and we're going to do it by forcing people to upgrade things every so often and buy things that they have to buy through Apple or Apple licensed retailer or manufacturers. So
to be fair to Apple, the lightning cable is one cable and it really hasn't changed. Now, that's not necessarily the greatest thing. I'm not sure what it's done about, if anything, their transfer rates over the years may have just remained stable.
I mean, it doesn't
like
to
USB
have particularly
2
high transfer rates for the iPhone.
Yeah, right. But the issue there being, to be fair to Apple on this, the USB cables are a mess right now, even in USB-C. Just like what power delivery is supported, what speeds are supported. The language and messaging on it is awful. The USB Commission themselves have just done a full, basically like rebrand where they're
Yeah.
requiring people to use certain signage on packaging. It's not necessarily on the cable, but the packaging, so that like once you have just a USB-C cable, it's like, who knows what it supports.
Yeah.
So like that could be a thing where Apple's like, we don't want to deal with customers being like, it's not charging fast, or like because the cable doesn't support power delivery that is required. It's all, or it's a USB 2 cable that it's wrapped in a USB-C format, form factor, or it's just charging. And why doesn't it send data? It can't sync to the laptop. Like,
Yeah, I suppose it's no different than any other company that uses USB-C standard, though.
that is true.
So,
But it's something Apple doesn't have to deal with right now because they've all had their. Although I should say that that's not necessarily the case anymore with their iPads, because some of their iPads are USB-C.
oh yeah, they're slowly transferring over. Maybe they just saw the writing on the wall. Either way, this is
Way off
relevant
topic.
to the whole thing. But
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is that they can selectively pick and choose where certain regulatory
Yes.
bodies put action on them. So
Yeah.
Microsoft could say, "Hey, it's fine. We won't put We'll have to put Call of Duty on PlayStation in the EU, but everywhere else, it's going to be specific." And then you as a US person, you're probably like, "I have to import the EU version that has some sort of lockout on it, or who knows what." Anyways.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that bodes well for Microsoft in whole. Like, I imagine that at this point there's going to be some sort of regulation put on them before the merge, or before the acquisition is allowed to go through. What that actually looks like, we won't know until March at this point. So,
Yep.
well, let's move on to the next point, talking about layoffs to some degree.
Yeah.
Meta and Twitter are making huge cuts to the workforce. This has been pretty well reported on at this point. Unfortunately, it's not likely to be a singular event in the tech sector, especially. Like, it's probably very likely that Twitch is going to see some significant layoffs in the near future as well. But the specter of layoffs is kind of looming over the tech industry because it's inflated size. And sort of the way its growth trajectory has been on for a long while, it's expected that there's going to be a contraction, especially as regulators get more and more privy to the fact that social media companies are like the harbinger of the destruction of democracy. So with that said, in Meta's case specifically, Meta had gambled a ton of money into making the metaverse work as from Mark Zuckerberg's words, and I'm not entirely sure this is entirely the case, but they put a ton of money behind developing the metaverse when they saw that COVID-19 was going to force people to virtualize things, and they expected that movement to persist even after COVID sort of like subsided. And I'd argue that's still true. Like, there's more and more remote positions. More and more people are working from home, not required to go into the office often. I mean, they even say as much that, given that they're a partially remote studio now, or like office, that they're going to be shrinking their footprint, their real estate footprint as a result. And they're citing these reasons as why they had a massive layoff, which was about a 13% contraction against their entire company, which is equivalent to 11,000 employees are getting laid off or were laid off. They are following California code and what to do there, and I think they're overcompensating with people and basically getting 6 months of pay.
Their package is super impressive.
Yes, and I think it's kind of the result of a company who doesn't want to admit defeat. And so they're taking their current earnings and going, okay, we're gonna this is the first massive layoff we've had to have, and we're gonna compensate. But I've seen this happen in companies before where this is the first contraction of many, and the first wave gets a not a golden parachute, but like a pretty decent consolation prize. But as cuts continue to happen, it gets less and less impressive, and it's more and more difficult for Facebook to or Meta to maintain their team size and their operational budget. Given the fact that both their real estate footprint has shrunk, I mean, I guess because they let go of 11,000 people, but also that the layoff itself, they're trying to claw back money. They lost $4 billion this year, and I'm not sure. Like, you can lose $4 billion as a company because you've invested in something that you expect to pay out. Like Microsoft does this, where they lose lots and lots of money, but usually with an obvious, here's what we're doing, and here's the business that we plan to see growth in. I think the prospect for Facebook is that there is no future prospect where they look like they're going to be making more money than they are today. And that's the result. And the reason why they're laying off a huge amount of people is because that's the forecast for them. Their ad revenue, their social media engagement in general is waning. More competitive platforms like TikTok, they don't own, are gaining steam against them. Like, they are not in the same environment they were 10 years ago, and as a result, they have to contract. And it may very well be one of many. The unfortunate part is that this heavily hit Meta Labs, which is their AR/VR metaverse development group, which was developing in games, a game platform, as well as AR/VR experiences. I don't know if you'd call it a game, but
they are still, interestingly enough, though, they are still keeping metaverse as one of their core pillars of future work.
Yeah. Which I think, well, they have to, right? Like, their social media business is not growing.
Right, yeah.
And all the signs
and their
point
ads
to that.
Business.
Right. Their ads business, it requires social media engagement. Engagement's going down. People are leaving the platform. Other platforms are more competitive. Gen Z is not a Facebook generation. So they're facing like if we don't find another hugely profitable place for us to make money, then Facebook as it is today will cease to exist. This is different than like Google and other tech companies that kind of exploded around the same time, because their business is very different than Facebook's, which is exclusively social media.
Currently, yeah. I think what they may be trying to do is play a future defensive role against someone like Apple, because their profits took a hit, and actually Zuckerberg in his announcement of the layoffs mentioned that he did not anticipate the magnitude as to which initiatives like Apple's initiatives to remove the ability to track users on devices would affect Meta's ad serving capabilities.
Or regulation, for that matter.
Right. Yeah, both of them.
Yeah.
Both of them. Right. Yeah, the increases in regulation and platform security, let's say, around exfiltration of user data, like private user data. Those things have caused Meta's core business model significant damage, and reduced their ability to do ad targeting. The value of ads, they can't charge the same money that they used to for it. They're serving theoretically a bit less now as the engagement numbers, as you mentioned, seem to have peaked and are on the wane at the moment. So they're being hit on those fronts, as well as on the fronts of like everybody else right now with inflation and everything, effectively global inflation in the market. So they're getting squeezed on all the fronts at the same time as they're spending record money on their future bet of this metaverse being a huge thing. And for them, this is where it comes back to what I started this line of reasoning on. The platform that they're building is one with goggles, right? It's the VR, AR platform where you have this immersive space. We're going to bring in business. We're going to bring in commerce. We're going to bring in everybody's day-to-day entertainment experiences into the virtual reality, augmented reality space. And we want to be like with the Oculus, now Meta, the Quest line of products, at least at this early stage, they're putting a foot down and saying, we're going to own it. We're not going to be trying to put our software on Apple's devices and on Google's devices. We're going to be the platform and the devices that power this, and therefore Apple won't be able to turn off our ability to track things, and we'll be able to show ads to people where they're relevant in their space at the time at which they need them. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
That's their play here, and that's they're still focused on that. And Zuckerberg did reiterate in the blog entry that he posted that they are still, that is one of their core businesses right now, even if it is also being affected by layoffs. That includes the game teams that exist within Meta.
Yeah, I think just the point is that like a $4 billion loss, even if it's a couple of years, is for a company the size of Facebook would not lead to contraction.
No.
Like I said, Microsoft can make a huge multi-billion-dollar gamble that requires them to lose like $5-10 billion in their games division alone, and it doesn't mean that they're laying off 90% of their, or like whatever, half of their Xbox staff.
Right.
Meta in specific is that they have no long-term prospects to continue to grow at the rate they've been growing, or even grow at any sort of rate right now. In their only path forward towards some sort of new growth will still be Meta. So it's not going to be, I cannot foresee a future in which they would axe the Meta initiatives. I think they'll probably have to readjust to say, like, how quickly do we think we're going to generate revenues back? And I think that's probably more realistically them saying, okay, well, we thought it was going to come together a bit faster. We'd find a revenue stream much faster we could grow out, and it hasn't happened yet. And in specific, the Oculus side of things, it hasn't been making money for them. I mean, I think it makes money to some degree, but it's after the losses on hardware that they're dealing with, and as a whole, as a group, I think they're not generating revenues until they start pricing the headset at a higher price.
No, I think they're in the red right now. Their spend is larger than their income.
Yeah.
Running the platform, selling it, the supply chain, building the hardware, designing the hardware, the loss that they were taking. They were selling at a loss for a while for their headsets. All of that.
I mean, they probably back at loss stage. I mean, there was. I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but it was just reported that Microsoft is still eating like a $100 to $200 loss on every Xbox sold.
Yep.
I think what you had talked about, and we're like, well, no, maybe they're making breaking even at this point in time. It's like, nope, $200 on every Xbox Series X, $100 maybe on Xbox Series S. Yeah, because all the factors in which you hope for, the decrease in cost in manufacturing, every single aspect of manufacturing right now, especially if you're manufacturing in China, has gone up. So yeah, it's eating prices, and that's why they threatened they may also in fact raise prices on hardware, but that's neither here nor there. I guess the question I have for you towards this Meta aspect of things is what does it say about Facebook and the prospects of the metaverse, where presumably a lot of gaming is going to be focused in the next 10 years?
Yeah, the question is at scale, right? I mean, we already have games that people buy and play. The challenge is mass market appeal, and I think that because headsets, like you and I could buy a PlayStation or an Xbox and spend $300 to $500,
yeah,
or a Switch, and maybe a game and a game or two, an extra $50 to $70 per game. And then an extra controller to an extra $50 to $70 per controller. That adds up pretty quickly. But at the same time, once you have those things, it's just the game. With Meta and VR goggles and everything right at this stage, everyone needs their own headset. So basically everyone needs their own console to play. There's no couch co-op really with one headset that you can enjoy. And that's not to say that there are that many people, especially right now with the pandemic.
Also, I think there's probably experiences that could come out of VR where someone wears the goggles, and another person's watching on TV and has some sort of interaction with the controller as like a sort of like how the Mario Galaxy worked.
Yep. Yep, that is possible. I'm not sure of an example where that is the
Neither
case
do
in my
I.
mind.
Like I can think of one. So
Yeah, but it's possible. Like it's definitely possible and possibly compelling. But um, yeah, the challenge is simply that you have to sell a lot of the headsets in order for them to be, make a lot of money and become a mass market thing. And they were getting there. I think Meta was getting there with the $300 Quest. The option to sell it at that. They were in Costco. I don't know that I ever saw someone pick one up, but there was a pile of them in Costco. I think
and
there still
they
is.
sold a ton of Oculus
Yeah,
sets. So yeah.
yeah, I know a bunch of people who have them, but a lot of the stories that I've heard are people that buy them, pick them up, try them, play them occasionally, and then set them down. Don't really pick them up again.
Yeah.
There isn't really a compelling reason to keep going back, and part of the challenge here is marketing. There haven't been that many marketing. I mean, I don't know. Do you
I
see
mean,
many
and market
ads?
fit, right? Like, I think this is the problem, and this is, I feel like Oculus kind of fell into the same trap that uh, the Wii did, which is like, here's a brand new way to experience virtual things, whatever it be,
Sure.
on a TV or on a goggles, whatever. It's a novel way of doing it, and people are like, oh, awesome! I want to try this novel way of interacting with things, and then Facebook comes in with their Oculus at a competitive price point. People are like, I've seen people playing with VR. Now's my chance. I only have to invest $300 to do it, and so people got it, and people experienced it, and they go, oh, that's neat. But I don't really see anything advancing here that makes me compelled to keep using it. And
Yeah.
like Meta's focus on, well, we're going to build a virtual chat space. Like that's not the novel experience people are looking for. I'm sure some people find it compelling, but the Second Life has existed for a while, and that's never really gone mass market for probably the same reasons. There's just not a lot of appeal in that sort of interaction yet. It is going to probably take another generation, or possibly even like the PSVR 2, to possibly crack open like the engagement thing, where suddenly people can see a future of what the next VR experience will be like and want that next thing, and they're willing to spend the money to do it. But I mean, even with Sony, I think they're showing their hand, saying like, in this economic environment, like I know we want to push PSVR 2 forward, but we're kind of waving a flag and launching in spring and not launching with like a huge setup of games, and we're giving it another year before I think we'll probably do our big marketing push, and we're not going to put a lot of marketing dollars behind it. Like all that points to Sony's not even confident that a VR headset priced at the price of a modern day console is really going to be a strong, compelling sell to people in a down economy, especially one that's an inflated down economy where people are being pinched everywhere. So
Yeah, uh, it's an uphill battle for sure. And the thing is that surprise. I was expecting them to dial back the messaging on the metaverse, given uh, fairly universally fairly universal panning that they had from the journals, and I guess journals from the media after their most recent VR announcements and whatnot, with their metaverse announcement stuff and what they showed off. It But they're doubling down. They're
I mean,
sticking with it.
like I said, I think it's a smart move because I think their social media business is not going to be, if they only stuck with social media as a business and like we'll continue to grow out Facebook. It's like there is no growth in Facebook.
Yeah, they need a platform that they can own.
Yeah, and they need another platform that is another social media that has appeal to another generation, or at the very least, in which is I think you were seeing with Meta's initiatives, is that they just need to find an actual proper business case for a business, and now they're looking at like, oh, virtual environments and virtual meetings and
Yeah, I mean,
virtual office space.
I suspect it may also go the hardware platform angle as well, not just social media. But they're watching Apple win in many of these court cases and take a few hits, particularly in different countries than the U.S. But where Apple has the complete vertical market, they control what apps show up on your iDevices. They control the hardware and what's available on it and what you can change about it. Their operating system, they control that, and they control what phone companies are partnered with it, right? So they control that top to bottom, and they also control Facebook's ability to get data from the users. So this is, to my mind, I think Meta is not just thinking, okay, we need to be where's the next big social movement? I think they may be looking at it and saying, where can we build our next big social movement and guarantee that there's going to be no one who can cut us out?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
like certainly that's
that.
an aspect of it, but
Yeah,
I just feel like they've signaled themselves that is not, at least in the short term, that's not where they're going to be making money. I think the things that they expected to grow this past year turned out to kind of fizzle, and now like they have a whole pivot and about face about what Meta is and what Meta's next business initiatives are, and it's going, oh, actually, I think we're going to price our headsets at $1,500, and this is going to be sold to offices so that for $1,500, it's less than they might spend even on like a ticket to a conference or something. And so,
yeah.
you know, we could have branded headsets where company X who's sponsoring a conference pays and subsidizes the cost of headsets for all the goers. They get a Facebook or like a Meta headset for, you know, $1,000 instead of that, and that's cheaper than the ticket to attend. And suddenly they're plugging into this thing, and we're going to replace, conferences, business conferences, events, and in-person office meetings that we think we can virtualize. And they may or may not have a space there. It's really going to be whether or not the corporate environment takes this, because I think the $1,500 price tag for the type of headset that they're selling is not compelling to gamers. It's going to be specifically to a corporate or enterprise sort of customer at that point.
Sure. How about Twitter?
Twitter, on the other hand, well, the Twitter layoffs are like self-inflicted pain.
Sort of, yeah.
Self-inflicted pain is the best way to put it. But even their layoffs, which I think were 3,700 layoffs, their layoffs
50%
hit their game side of things as well. I'm not entirely sure how big that was, but I think it was like the game side of things was making sure that game topics and whatnot were curated, and there was a space for that. So that was axed, but I mean, so much of Twitter was axed that
yes,
it's. I mean, the whole company's gonna get restructured, basically. Like the company as we know it today is not going to be the company that's going to be in the next year.
Yep. There, in fact, or just earlier today, Elon Musk was signaling that Twitter filing for bankruptcy may be a thing. It's a card that is currently on the table to signal effectively how dire their financial situation is right now. But that could just be...
So the file for bankruptcy would be a strategic move, because it'd be Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Basically, in their current state, they owe more on a monthly basis to their debtors, or creditors, excuse me, than they generate.
Yeah.
Period. And part of that, I think, was part of the buyout. The buyout terms, I think, messed with that. And basically, Twitter as a company will not generate positive revenue and not be able to pay back its debts, which means that the company either shutters by like bleeding out for like 3 years, or in Musk's option, he's going to take a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The bankruptcy will come with like a significant contraction where they try to cut out whatever they can so that they can become positive. But it also means that they're no longer obligated to their debtors, or to their creditors, excuse me. And their debt will be likely absolved. And it also means that I think standing lawsuits against them get cut too.
I don't remember. I don't know the details, but that is I think the quote was difficult times ahead.
Yeah.
which it certainly seems that way.
I mean,
Given that,
I think it points to a larger thing about social media networks and just how long they actually have legs for. Like, this is what we're seeing with Facebook, we're seeing with Twitter. These legacy social media platforms just cannot do what they were doing in their growth period. And now it really comes down to what's the next new social media, which is an
yep,
interesting thing to be, because like we're seeing this pattern where a new social media company can come out of nowhere, take a new generation of people or people who are disenfranchised by the social medias that exist, and force the legacy social media company to either figure out a new way to do business or just die a
buy
slow
them
death,
or buy them.
or buy or they
But,
buy them, which was place Meta's MO for a while when they bought like Instagram and whatnot. But TikTok was
yep,
not buyable, and TikTok is eating their lunch right now. The only thing that would
yep,
change that is U.S. government regulators saying, nope, TikTok's a government or is a Chinese government organization, and as such, we don't think there's data privacy. So for national security purposes, we're going to clamp down on what TikTok is. Although I think last time that was threatened under the Trump administration, TikTok had suggested that they would branch the company and have a U.S. based version of the company and a Chinese based
yeah,
company, and they would operate independently.
right, right,
So, anyways,
yeah,
on to the last topic, I think. Do you want
sure.
to summarize this?
Yeah, so basically, Mick Gordon is a composer in the games industry, and he is prolific. He has done music for the Need for Speed series, Dead Space 3, Killer Instinct, the remake from the Xbox One era, the original release. He didn't do any of the follow-up seasons. He just did the original. Wolfenstein, the remakes of Wolfenstein, Prey, the recent versions of Prey, and most recently the revived Doom franchise with Doom from 2016 and Doom Eternal, which is the I think 2020 was when it released.
2020 or 2021, one of those years.
2020
is
yeah,
one of the sad years. Yeah.
Yeah, the sad years. The sad years. As well as an upcoming game called Atomic Heart, which looks pretty good. He's got a really distinct style and does some very impressive, composition. He's got a very creative approach to sound design, as is evident in his Killer Instinct and from the Doom 2016 titles. He has given multiple GD talks about his process and about the ways that he creates the music of these games and the sort of the musical signature that drives the feel of them. And those tend to be very popular videos because they're open to the public, and even the public enjoy watching him talk about the crazy instruments he used to get the really awesome sounds that drive people in the Doom games and whatnot. So fast forward to so id Software, who is owned by Bethesda, who is owned by ZeniMax,
Who's owned by Microsoft?
will be owned by.
Not
Oh no, you're right. They are.
That
one did get
through
completed
already. Yeah.
They're now owned by Microsoft. Yes. Good call. They contracted with Mick Gordon again for Doom.
Eternal.
What's Eternal? Thank you. I blanked on that for a second. For Doom Eternal, they contracted with him to do the music. This time, however, things got off to a little bit of a different start. They basically said, we're going to try to save money by creating this contract that said, actually, let me back up. I'm getting into details. Basically, id Software contracts with Mick Gordon to create the music for Doom Eternal. Awesome. He works with them, creates that. They announce in sort of E3 2018 or 2019, I think 2019, that they're going to do a collector's edition, and it's going to include a soundtrack by Mick Gordon, which he had not been contracted to do yet. And he was like, what? So he reached out to them. Things sort of proceeded behind the scenes for a while. And when it came time to release, the game was originally supposed to be released in November of 2019. It got pushed to March of 2020. At which point, 2 days or so before, some few days before the release of the collector's edition and the release of Doom Eternal, id Software came out and said, "Hey, everybody, we're really sorry about this. We have to delay the album. It's not ready yet. We're going to have it to you by April 16th or whatever, some future date." So at some point they hit that date. The album comes out. It's something like 56 tracks or something. It's a huge, huge album. And it has some oddities to it. First of all, most of the tracks come with it says like in the music's title, it says by Mick Gordon and another name which I'm blanking on right now, Chad Mossholder, or I think.
Yeah.
And so it comes with those two names, and everyone's like, okay, that's weird. Secondary. So Chad Mossholder, by the way, is the lead audio designer for id Software, and he was lead audio on it's Doom Eternal. Some of the titles though are Mick Gordon by himself. Well, it turns out people were like not at all impressed with the tracks that came with the dual names, because they were not up to the standard quality that everyone expects from Mick Gordon from his multiple game soundtracks. From Doom Eternal itself, the music in the game is amazing and it's well mixed, it's well presented, and that was not happening in the soundtrack. The music feel was off. There were pops and cracks in the mixing. There were all these weird things happening. You're laughing?
Yeah, because my stomach just growled very loudly.
Oh, wow. Luckily, I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
So all of this stuff was happening. People called it out. They were like very upset about the quality of this album. They were like, this is not one person on Twitter was like, I'm an audio engineer and I am usually in awe of Mick Gordon's stuff, and this is just depressing. I don't know what he did, and then at some point he actually responded and said, I didn't mix those. You know, like you can tell the ones that I mixed and they're not those ones. And that, you know, he's looking at the waveforms in a waveform, you know, DAW or audio software, and can say like, here, you can see the problems with these tracks. Like, what is happening? That prompted a response from the executive producer of Doom Eternal on to stand up for his teammate, Chad Mossholder, who is getting a little flack by association with this conversation, and especially because of the tweet from Mick Gordon, at least perceived to be from this tweet, where Mick Gordon basically said, you know, that those weren't mixed by me. Those in what's the statement here? By association or whatever, by process of elimination, the implication, that's the word I was looking for. The implication is that Chad was responsible for this, which may be the case. Regardless, this prompted the executive producer of Doom Eternal to come out and write a statement defending his teammate and trying to explain what happens. This seemed to be very negative towards Mick and cast him under a really unprofessional light, saying that he was delayed, he was late with deliveries, he had many issues with the game, and that id Software unfortunately was not going to be able to work with him again in the future, or at least would not be working with him on the music for DLC. To which there was radio silence from Mick for a long time, and there were some weird inconsistencies in this big post. And by the way, that open letter came out on Reddit. It was posted to the /r/Doom subreddit, which, you know, is big Doom fans, and the executive producer for id Software had used an account. What's that?
A personal account.
Right, but it was with his it's like his name at id or something like that. The one that's associated with his job, not necessarily his personal one. It was his own, to be sure, his controlled by him, but it was still his professional one, where he came out and said this, and this ended up causing, we find out later, some issues for Mick, and Mick was quiet for a very long time until yesterday, when Mick Gordon posted a response on Medium, the blog posting journalistic enterprise, stating my full statement regarding Doom Eternal. And there were many, many revelations that came out here. Justin, do you want to cover a few of those?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some key points to pull out of what Mick alleges, and
Yeah.
it's mostly that the structure of the contract that they were operating under for Doom Eternal, in Mick's words, were there to optimize the creation process, because if you played Doom and you played Doom Eternal, music is a very strong part of the whole experience.
Hmm.
And under this executive producer, Mick was expected to follow a kind of like a produce completed tracks gradually as like from, I don't know, the beta period or something like that. It was 2 years before the game released, probably early alpha actually, on a steady basis to get to the point. But there's a problem with that whole thing, which is how do you create completed music for game levels that don't exist? But this is the expectation. So there was some contention there, and he alleges that when he suggested a better way to do this because progress was going poorly, and I'll get into the details of the contract, which I'm certain this part is true. But when he suggested another way, he was kind of taken, like the executive producer responded in a pretty hostile way. The thing that to keep in mind is how typical game composers are paid. It can be one of two ways, but it's more typical one way than the other. One is by the amount of time you spend, which is not typical, in the amount of minutes that you produce for it, which is more typical. So it's basically, I'll charge you $5,000 a minute of music I produce for the game soundtrack. And they had agreed to, I don't remember the exact amount, but say it was like 200 minutes of soundtrack. That's what they'll get paid for. So as this contract goes on, it's not good for Mick, as he alleges. Things are not getting sent the way that they are, not getting produced at the rate that he would like to be producing in. It's requiring a lot of edits. That means he has to produce more music to get something that the team is happy with, which means he's crunching a lot more and it not getting completed pieces, which also means he's not getting paid anything, because for every completed minute he'd get money paid out. But if they're not agreeing to anything that he completed, then he gets no payment. And he alleges that he had gone without payment for over 10 months at one point.
The first time was 8 months, and then it came out. Yeah, he got paid one time after 8 months, and then the second time was 11 months.
Yeah. So these are the sort of conditions that Mick was operating under. There's other aspects of it too, which were completion of the contract was delayed, which I mean can happen, but he was unaware of the agreement that he would be creating an album that would be in contract under most normal circumstances. He alleges it was never part of the contract. They had to recontract for something, and when he was trying to go, hey, you announced this at E3, where's the contract to do this? They kind of ghosted him for, I don't remember what it was, like 7 months.
3 months. Yeah. So the way that happened was, they came to him. Well, they announced at GDC, like, hey, we're going to do this. And Mick watched he learned it through the announcement. He was like, wait, what? We don't have a contract for this. No one has talked to me about this. In the past games, they have, like, you have a separate contract for game music and you have a separate contract for mixing and mastering a soundtrack, which is a different process. It's a different item. So you need a separate contract for it. It's a different product. And they didn't have one. And it was very weird to Mick that he'd never heard anything about it. So he immediately reached out to the executive producer and said, hey, let's get a contract on this, and so I can start working on it, because they had just delayed it. E3 was, let's say, August-ish of 2019, and they were still targeting November. And they didn't get the delay until a little bit later. So they were like, oh my God, we have, like, I'm still trying to wrap up the game music for this. I think we can do it if we get on it now. And it was just radio silence. They didn't hear anything for a while, until after the delay happened. Mick Gordon reached out to, he'd heard nothing about this topic for several months. And in, I think, January of 2020, 2 months before the game is set to release, he reaches out to Bethesda, going around the executive producer to say, hey, this is still happening. It's got my name on it. We do not have a contract in place. I don't know how you're going to do this. And Bethesda went, uh-oh, and very quickly started the conversation going. Now they went back and forth with contract negotiations, and they said, like, what is this? How is this? And Mick said, no, that I can't work with that. Like, they had to basically dial down the requirements from the targeted album size to 12 tracks from 50 or 60. They brought it down to 12. And that was written into the contract. The contract wasn't signed until 2 days before the game shipped for the soundtrack. And Mick was going to go for basically 30 days at full bore to try to get this done in the deadline that they set. And they did. Bethesda did in the contract add a bonus if he was able to get it done by that date. Now, mind you, consumer protection laws come into play here, and Mick was aware of that. He said, "How are you going to set if you have my name on there and no contract to do this? You're going to be trying to pre-sell something to people under a false pretense, and there are consumer protection laws that disallow that." And as the date was getting closer, ZeniMax and Bethesda tier were like, "Oh Jesus, we are going to be like falling into that category and are going to have to issue refunds, and probably mandatory refunds because the product was not sold as described." And they wanted to avoid that, so he worked really hard to enable that to happen. Meanwhile, at some point, the ZeniMax and Bethesda brought the executive producer back in, who got wind of it and started saying, "Oh my gosh, we already have, our lead audio person has put together an album for this, the soundtrack." And it was something like 46 tracks of music that had been spliced together from the stems that the game used, which is mastered differently. It's a different process.
Which, to be fair, would be what Mick would have to do as well, but Mick, being a composer, would probably do it in a bit more of a nuanced way.
Right. He would go from possibly pre-delivered files and remix and possibly write a few custom pieces to make sure that it fit correctly. Yep. And that each track was its own composition and not just slapdash together things. But so that's what happened. He got a delivery at some point, and it turns out that, according to Mick alleges with screenshots, that the tracks that were sent to him had metadata in them that linked back to August of 2019, which means that they were working on this soundtrack back in August, before, like, around the time that Mick had brought it up. So that seems as though they were potentially going to try to, Mick doesn't even mention this, but reading it and looking at it, it looks as though if Mick's alleged dates about the contracts and the way this unfolds is correct, they may have been trying to build their own soundtrack with music from the game. Yeah. And because it was composed, that music was composed by Mick originally, they might be able to get away with having his name on those things. Although, that we get into really serious issues about representation.
IP protection. Basically,
yeah.
Unless the contract that Mick had signed had included distribution of a soundtrack within it, then there can be no contract without a new there can be no soundtrack without a new contract where Mick gives the permission for Bethesda, ZeniMax, id, whatever, to distribute a new soundtrack, which they didn't have. So it would have been illegal and breaking copyright law for them to go ahead and produce a new album, a new medium in which the music was going to be distributed that was not agreed to previously.
Right. And then there's the question about composed by Mick Gordon, because he claims that no, those tracks had composed by me. Yes, the stems and the original files were music edited by Chad Moss-Older. But there's contention there about Mick alleges that there's also some contention about rights attribution in terms, or not rights, but artistry attribution.
Right.
Additionally, it should be mentioned that Mick became aware of the fact that not only did all this stuff happen with let me back up. the files that Chad had sent were sort of slapdash brought together, and they were not mixed to the standard sort of music composition standards that are used in the music industry when distributing an album or something of that nature. They had pops and clicks in them. They had odd timing with the music because there wasn't a beat grid that was used when they were sort of putting two different stems together. They were crossfading, so you had really like where the two pieces came together get really loud. Very odd music tracks. At any rate, so that Mick is not happy being associated with that because it's besmirching his name. The quality is not as good. It's not up to his own snuff. And he was called out for it by someone on Twitter, and he had to defend himself there. And he very quickly put out one little tweet, and then that prompted, along with some other stuff, apparently, the response in the Doom thing. Now, meanwhile, after the game launched, Mick became aware that two things about the music in the game had happened. First of all, before the game was released, Justin had mentioned that he had to get, in order to get paid for a track, they had to okay the track. Well, it turns out that in their E3 or E3 2018, they had announced the game and they had used music. And they had used music that they had claimed that they were not okay with, that they did not approve. But they used music that he had produced. And he saw it. He just watched it with everybody else and was like, cool, wait, they're using my music.
Right. Again, this is using music without a contract is using someone else's IP illegally. So
right. And so they said, fine, we'll accept this one. And they brought it into the contract and they paid him for it eventually. There were disputes about when he was getting paid for the work that he'd done, what had been accepted and whatnot. Now, it also turns out he had produced over 2 times the amount of music total that the final game was supposedly to ship with, that he was contracted to produce. The total music that he had sent them and said, here are tracks I propose, was over double what they asked.
It was more than that. No, it's even worse than that. It was over double the amount that he had contracted for, they used in the game. He probably produced more than what he had produced that was actually used in the game.
Oh no, totally.
Yeah.
But the thing is that he produced well over double, and then
they used over double what they contracted for.
Right. He was contracted for, it was not actually 200, it was like 140 or something like that. But like the exact amount. So like let's say that they contracted him for 200 minutes of tracks. They used something like 400 minutes of tracks of the stuff that he had produced. And like people have done dumps of the game files and said, here's all the assets, here's all the music files. And they just added it up, and they were like, he looked at it and was like, what? Like, you've used all that stuff that you contract, which is a breach of contract, right? They used music that they had denied, that didn't pay for.
But they used for their own gain financially.
Right.
Huge breach of contract.
There's all of these. What's that?
It's a huge breach of contracts, right? You'd expect a company. Again, this is alleged, but Mick Gordon brings along receipts when he posts this blog entry on Medium. So while it can't be verified true without a legal proceeding, it certainly looks that Mick's claims are correct. Maybe the whole story isn't being told, but certainly the allegations appear to be true. And if so, there's at least 3 points where they breach contract, both with the E3 using music that hadn't been approved and not paid for, which they eventually did rectify. The album, which there was no contract for, and he eventually signed a contract to do it, but they ended up using music he never agreed to and was produced by someone else. And then finally, the game itself ended up using content that he was never paid for and was ending up using that medium. All this stuff should have been contracted and established within their core contract, or extended upon if there was a need to.
So why now? Why a year and a half, or over a year and a half? I guess it's been a year and a half, about a year and a half since that post from the executive producer. Well, it from Reddit that sort of besmirched his name and caused problems. It actually ended up resulting in Mick getting doxxed by Redditors. and having death threats and other stuff thrown at him. His family, yeah, people associated with him. Just awful vitriol. The worst of the internet being thrown at this.
Coming from a central allegation that Mick Gordon's quality in the game and the soundtrack from which people purchased a special edition for fell squarely on his unprofessional shoulders, as alleged by the executive producer.
Right. Well, it turns out behind the scenes, Mick Gordon had been trying to get the post removed, and he did briefly. There was one apparent brief period, like of 12 hours or something, where the post was removed, but it was brought back up. And at this point, during this period, basically right after that post appeared, Mick had contacted lawyers to discuss options, and had reached out to the ZeniMax's lawyers to discuss what's going on, because not only had he not been paid for...
There's another piece that you're missing here, which was after the panning of the album, in which Mick found out that the 12 tracks that he had agreed to do weren't on the were on the soundtrack, but there was another, I don't know, 30 some odd tracks,
like that 46 or something.
Yeah, that appeared on there that he didn't mix and produce. It was just made out of the assets that he had created for the game. That's what was getting heavily panned, and he had a conversation with the executive producer to go, how can we rectify that? Actually, I think the executive producer came to him and said, we need to have a joint statement that says what we're going to do to fix this. And Mick, of course, is saying, well, I'm not going to fix anything until there's a contract to fix this produced album that I never produced. And he was getting pressured to do something about it there. I think they butt heads a bit, and this is all according to Mick. And they had agreed that they were going to figure out a way to move forward with this and to address people and create a new album. And then the post went out from the executive producer directly onto Reddit that assailed his character. And that's when Mick was like, what the heck? I'm going to follow up with lawyers because this is not what I agreed to. This is not what we talked about on the phone, etc.
Right. Thank you. That's good context. So with all that in mind, he's now been, like, they're using his music illegally. Allegedly, they're using his music illegally. They are besmirching his name, and which is his business and his livelihood, because he is a contractor who works under the Mick Gordon brand, effectively, right? They had caused him a lot of crunch and a lot of grief, going back and forth with, like, months and months without payment on all these things because they were late on their contractual obligations and stringing him along. So after all of this stuff, he finally gets this big smack in the face with the Reddit post, and suddenly is now being attacked by people on the internet. And it's like, okay, it's time to bring in the lawyers. Let's not make this a big public thing. Let's figure this out behind the scenes. He starts working with the lawyers, and at some point he's, they see that they want to do a settlement, with all of the evidence that he has on this stuff. Allegedly, they claim they want to do a settlement, and they basically say there are a number of things that are very much in id's favor, and in particular in the favor of,
which is typical for lawyers, by the way.
Yeah, especially on the id Software executive producer's role. Like, one of the things Mick wanted to do as a requirement for this is to take that Reddit post down, and they were like, right, and a public apology, and it was absolutely not. That's a non-starter from them, because they said it was going to, like, negatively affect the public persona of the executive producer.
Yeah,
just like, that's exactly what this is doing to this guy.
Yeah,
and it's lies. Like, allegedly, it's all these lies. So, and they eventually try to buy him off with a six-figure. He doesn't name the figure, but he says 6 figures. They try to say, you can't say anything about this. If anyone asks you about it, you say no comment. We leave up the post, but you'll get the 6 figures. And he says, absolutely not. And then eventually, by the way, during this period, the reason it took 1.5 years, or a little over a year, for this all to come to light, actually 2020. Oh, it's been like almost 2 years. 2020, over 2 years. The reason that it took that much time is because he was giving them the benefit of the doubt and trying to do things the legal way. But the lawyers were stringing him along, saying, "Oh, we have these. Someone is on holiday and they can't be reached. We need to reschedule the meeting, or we need to do this." Oh,
Yeah,
like
which is
something's
typical
come
delay
up.
tactics, which is drag out the lawsuit as much as possible to make it as painful as possible for someone to get compensation so that they may turn back or just go with an easy settlement.
Right. And so at this point, Mick has sort of reached the end of what is possible and has just said, "Okay, I'm going to come out in defense of myself. And here is the story from my side. Here are wherever he could, he was posting redacted images with emails and metadata tags and all this information to back up his statements in this huge blog entry on Medium.
Yeah,
That is pretty.
It's linked, by the way, in this
description of the video.
Yeah, you'll be able to find it there if you're interested in what's actually going on here. So
yeah, so this is a really unfortunate situation that has come to light. Justin, why do we think that this is important to come to light and to discuss?
I mean, I think primarily it's the story, as unfortunate as it is not uncommon amongst the game industry or the creative industry, where corporations think it's that like the artistry that goes into selling something is trivial and everything else is what's valued. So they tend to undervalue creative work, be it voice acting, artists, in music in this case. And most artists and most, I wouldn't say musicians, but most artists tend to be hired for a period of time. But musicians in particular tend to be contracted for whatever reason. And same thing with actors. It probably is because there's stronger, what do they call it? Unions that back up the people who do this type of work. So it's really important that contract exists, and a lot of large corporations will abuse the fact that like most small artists can't afford multi-million-dollar lawyers to write drafts of contracts, and they rely on their own lawyers to do things. But in a lot of ways, create favorable terms for the company and not for the person who's contributing, and tend in most cases to get a fraction of the compensation or a fraction of the profit that the company makes from the game. So like a game like Doom Eternal might have made Bethesda, whatever it is, $500 million, and a composer like Mick might only get $150,000 for the large composition, even though that $150,000 of composition is 20% of the experience, the game experience. It's not the game itself, but it plays into it. There's a lot of design aspects that's going into it, etc.
The flavor of the game in many ways.
Yeah. And so it's really not uncommon to see this sort of behavior. Now, for the game industry, it tends to be more common with like smaller indie games where companies may not have a lot of money to compensate good artists, and the artists contribute something, they expect some sort of payment, and there's back and forth and not proper compensation. People feel like they're getting burnt by companies who end up profiting well off of artists' work, but not paying out the artists for that. You don't expect to see it under large companies, and a lot of companies and companies that we've worked with or we know try to do the most due diligence, because the last thing they want to deal with is a lawsuit around the game, because it can hurt the game's press, can work negatively against its sales, and on top of that can hurt the studio and can lead to a massive lawsuit for not just compensation for the songs, but if their kind of bullshit causes the person some grief, they could potentially sue for other damages as well.
Yeah.
So you do not expect to see this from a company like Bethesda, but here we have this full account of basically an alleged rogue producer operating outside of contracts and trying just to benefit himself or the team or whatever it is, but basically stringing along a contractor, and then I'd say it's tantamount to, for at least what's alleged, to abuse of the contractor, and I think Mick is alleging that as much as well.
Yeah. It's important to highlight that this is coming from AAA like the most AAA, right?
Yeah.
id Software, the creators of Doom, like the most AAA, right? id Software, the creators of Doom, like the original Doom and Wolfenstein, they like created the first person shooter genre.
Yeah.
Like largely they did that with Wolfenstein, and then established it solidly with Doom, and then sort of so many people said like, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Like they're huge. They've been around for ages. Like they're dinosaurs in the games industry terms, and they have a lot of cachet, and it's sort of surprising to hear that this type of really unfortunate thing and mistreatment of developers can happen at such a high level in the industry. We like to think in the industry that oh, that's the purview. Yeah, it's unfortunate when those sad things happen, but it's usually with a newbie, someone new to the industry who doesn't have the experience or the know-how to deal with music contracts. It's their first contract. They don't know the red flags to look for, and it's a predatory indie studio that doesn't have a publisher, and they're just trying to get by because they don't have a budget.
Right.
There's no bigger company that's backing them or anything like that, right? Like you get lots of people in those cases stuck between rocks and hard places, and a mess comes out.
Right.
This is the top of the cream of the crop on both sides, effectively engaging in the same exact conversation. Arguably, it's worse because of the fact that you would expect an executive producer at that level to know better.
Yes.
And
the behavior that they allege is the same sort of behavior you'd expect from someone who's more junior than that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Especially in a producer role where, it sounds like you're effectively managing the production of the product of the game, the team. And it's from what Mick had written in his write-up, it sounds as though that was being poorly done across the board, at least insofar as his involvement with the game is concerned. It is also known that Doom Eternal suffered pretty extreme crunch during its development period. So it could be that
at least suggests that there's larger production issues beyond just the creation of the soundtrack.
Yep, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So,
I guess it's surprising that it's at the AAA level. I expect, everybody should expect better. And although it's not verified and probably won't be until there's a lawsuit, I think what as gamers should expect is that even though a game studio makes your favorite game, it doesn't mean that they're infallible. And a lot of times, a lot of the best studios are filled with people who tend to be abusive, not in the sense of like physical, but certainly abusive towards staff. We found this out with Activision and a lot of the allegations that are sent towards them. It's not surprising that happens at it as well. And we can't put these game studios on a pedestal, especially if it's at the cost of some of the strongest creators in the game industry being on the receiving end of the abuse. Because that means Mick Gordon, who is a fantastic composer, may not be composing with the game industry anymore, may move to other places, even though he's probably one of the more innovative, sort of interactive composers that are out there that really contribute to a game experience, as you find with Doom Eternal, Killer Instincts, etc. So this is sort of behavior that he describes where the Redditors and the toxic fandom had come after him. Like, we really, really, as an industry, have to crack down on that. It's just like, at that point, it's a producer sicking dogs on a prey, and it's like, no one's really questioning whether or not it's true. It's just taking one person's word for it. And as we're finding out from the two sides of the story, is like the story of that executive producer either is incomplete, untrue, or like
has
a part of the truth. I don't know. I don't even know what the other options are.
Part of the issue is that there are statements in there that are somewhat demonstrably misconstrued.
Yeah. Just
in his own arguments, there are things about it where, like, he basically clearly admits that they announced that they had Mick Gordon writing the album before they had him under contract.
Yeah.
which
And
is no
actually, yeah,
good.
like no, I think also the soundtrack. I think the soundtrack
No,
he was.
that's what it was. They
I
had
mean, like,
McLeod.
excuse me, the composition for the game as well. Like he was doing composition work for the game before there was a final contract. There was and same thing with the.
No, they did have a contract
Okay.
for the for the game for the music in the game, and that's where he was demanding payment as the game was going on for the minutes. It was they had no contract until March, like no signed contract, and the guy, at least that's what Mick claims. He showed
Well,
a
yeah, he has
screenshot,
proof where he says basically, here's the email date that I got the contract. So
and here's a picture of the what's that online DocuSign
yeah, it was a
or something.
DocuSign link that shows the
DocuSign
email
link.
date. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty compelling. I mean, he could have forged it, but still,
yeah. Uh, I mean,
he doesn't stand to benefit by fabricating information.
no, not at all.
Like he may have like a one-sided view of the story that's just spun and not fabricated. So I mean that's where I'd probably place it, is like not fabricated statements, but maybe the sort of it's possible that like his view of the story in which he felt like he was getting the wrong side of the producer, doesn't show how Mick might have been interacting, which could have caused the producer to react that way, like that sort of thing. But the statements he makes of truths like are probably not very arguable, and he has data to back it up. So it's like at a minimum, what he's stating as truths are probably true.
Yeah, yeah. The stuff he does back up a lot of his statements
Mm-hmm.
with screenshots, and pictures. Uh, a lot of and many of them are pictures of the screen, but
Yeah.
so it goes. Yeah, so it's a really, really sort of sad situation that we have been made aware of, and I think it's good that it's come out. My hope is that this will like clear the air for Mick, or at least let's say pave the way. Now that we've heard both sides, that we can, or from both sides, maybe there will be a rebuttal coming from the executive producer at id, or from ZeniMax slash Microsoft at this point, on what's going on. Maybe they're doing an internal audit of this, with all this stuff coming to light.
I mean, you would expect an internal audit to be done. Any pending lawsuits typically get reviewed during the buyout process, but it was already purchased, so that means Microsoft must have been aware of the lawsuits,
Mm-hmm.
and it went forward anyways. But now it's Microsoft's to deal with. So, at a minimum, you'd expect him to get compensated for the work he's done.
Yep.
Part of the grounds of the soundtrack, or like part of the grounds of the settlement, was supposed to be, we'll pay you a 6-figure salary, you give us the album, but the post stays up and you can't talk about this anymore. And that was the point of contention, where he's like, I'll do the album, you pay me for what you've used, and the producer will have to take down the album, or excuse me, have to take down the post. Basically, him conceding, I'll do the album for free because that's what we had agreed to in some capacity. You have to pay me for what you've used, but the slander has to come down. And they were like, absolutely not. We will not take culpability for anything,
Mm-hmm.
because taking culpability for anything says that we're guilty. So that's not going to happen. And Mick, I think probably rightly so, says, I'm not going to take the money. I'm not going to do the album. And I'm not going to be quiet about this. So now my only choice is to make it known what happened, so you can't defame my character. And there still probably has to be a settlement, because they used work probably verifiably that he was never paid for in any sort of court of law. They're going to be like, you have absolutely no right. And then it opens up things for possibly, if they used music that he didn't agree to, they now have grounds for him to contract and be like, no, for you to use that music, you have to pay me 10% of your profits.
Mm-hmm.
And so it opens the door wide open for that. If anything, it seems now that Bethesda shot themselves in the foot, or they didn't care because they thought they were being purchased by Microsoft. They're like, it's not going to be our problem after this. But either way, it's not good for Microsoft, because they're likely going to have to figure out some way to settle this, or be litigated. And likewise, Mick hopefully can see some sort of compensation from this, even if not monetary, that he will be contracted and he's not going to be treated as some sort of, I don't know,
Pariah.
yeah, pariah in the sense that, you know, he's the one that messed up the LP
Right.
for Doom.
Right. Right.
So
It's yeah. What surprised me about it was how Mick's statement. Of course, this is from Mick's point of view, and he's of
yes,
course going to present himself presumably in a decent light,
as
at the very
positive a light
least.
as possible. Yeah.
Right. And we don't know the details of the deals that he was trying to get, the contract details. The thing that occurred to me is when he mentioned in his write-up that they had not contracted him, and he announced, Bethesda announced the game, and they announced that the collector's edition would have a soundtrack composed by Mick Gordon, and there was no contract yet in place. In my head, I'm saying, oh boy, you just got them over a barrel. Good work on you. You have all of the leverage.
Yeah.
Because they're now advertising something that doesn't exist, and they theoretically have to deliver it. And by the way, they started taking pre-orders immediately.
Yeah, it was like that day.
After that announcement. Right.
Yeah,
so they were already selling
the Fallout 4
yeah.
special edition. Yeah.
Right. And so in this case, they were taking money for it, and they had no contract, so he could basically set the terms. They had to, in quotes, within reason, of course. There's a limit, but he, in theory, he should have been able to very quickly get a deal done and start working on it. But apparently, it was just radio silence that whole time. They were ignoring it,
or at least the executive producer was. He admits that he didn't have he waited a couple of months before he reached out to Bethesda, which they were quick to take action on it. But the executive producer was kind of, I don't know, ghosting.
MIA. Ghosting.
Yeah, in some way, it's from his perspective, and in the personal communications between them, I do have zero perspective, and taking one person's word over the others is difficult. But you can take the verifiable facts that Mick presents and be like, yeah, this doesn't look good for Bethesda.
Right.
Or at least id. Or this producer specifically.
I should mention that this executive producer on Doom Eternal, is now studio director for id Software.
Yeah. So as things go sometimes. Anyways, there's probably not much more to go on over this. If you want to read more about Mick's statements, you can catch the link in the description.
It's very detailed.
It's on Medium if you want to search it out yourself. We don't get paid for any of that. We just want to make sure people are aware of what's going on in the game industry, especially when it looks like such an unfortunate case as Mick describes. So,
yep. And
yeah, if you care about games, you should probably check it out.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
I was going to mention that the Doom, the post to the Doom subreddit is linked from Mick's response or his own statement.
Yeah, you can see a lot of the stuff that he alleges and the information that was made public, at least, available there. So,
yep.
All right, well, I guess that kind of cuts it for today. We kind of went long this one. I guess the topics had a lot of discussion. If you enjoy this sort of content, please like and subscribe. It does help us. It does really help us understand what content people want to see. Also, if you have suggestions on how we break up this content, we do 3 things in each episode, but the episodes are like 2 hours long. So if you want to see these broken up individually, we can always have that option for better discoverability, I guess, in YouTube if you want to see it that way. Let us know. Or if you want it on a podcast, that's something we can also do. So just let us know. Give us some comments. We appreciate it. So thanks, everybody, for following along. We'll be back again 6 p.m. Eastern Time next Thursday and every Thursday. Thanks, everybody.
All righty. Talk to you.